Bonus short stories. Your warmth. The time was early morning, with less than a week having gone by since Ryo began living with Miharu, Oki, and Masato. Ryo was sitting on the sofa in the living room of the rock house, asleep. While there was no one else in the room with him at first, early riser would eventually appear. It was Miharu. When she noticed him on the sofa, she tried to greet him cheerfully. "Ah, Haruto. Good morning." However, she soon noticed something was off about him, and her voice trailed off immediately. She approached hesitantly, noticing how papers were scattered across the table. On them were neatly organized graphs of letters and sentences. "This is for us." Miharu could guess what the purpose of those papers were. They were language learning materials made for herself and the other two Japanese students. There was no mistaking it, as there were explanations of the straw grammar and vocabulary written on it in Japanese. Ryo must have stayed up late, or perhaps gotten up early, in order to create the learning materials for them. It made Miharu feel a bit apologetic towards him. ZZZ. ZZZ. Ryo was sleeping peacefully with an expression that still held a sort of childish innocence. He normally seems so mature, but he's actually the same age as me, Though he said he was a university student in his past life, because of Ryo's ability to fly through the air and run at inhuman speeds, an outsider might think of him as superhuman, but someone like him could seemingly still feel tired, as well as sleep looking like this. Miharu looked at Ryo closely, examining him. He really did have a pretty face, she thought. Then, as she was looking at his appearance, I wonder where Haruko-kun is now? A fleeting thought of her former childhood friend resurfaced in her mind. Why did she think of him just now? Miharu didn't even know herself. Perhaps it was because the boy sleeping before her had the same name as her childhood friend. After Miharu had been staring at Ryo for a while, she breathed a gasp of realization. "Ah, he's going to catch a cold like this. I'll go get a blanket." She headed towards her own room in a hurry. Less than a minute later, Miharu returned to the living room in a flurry of footsteps, carrying a blanket in her arms. Miharu placed the blanket over Ryo gently, careful not to wake him up. Since she had just used the blanket herself mere moments ago, it was still cozy with a lingering warmth. "I can't just walk into Haruto's room without permission, so it should be fine if he uses mine. Right?" Miharu faltered briefly, but eventually decided to timidly place the blanket over Ryo. "There we go," she said in a quiet voice, gently lowering the blanket. Ryo's eyes suddenly blinked open. Ah, Miharu let out a surprised sound. She was leaning towards Ryo, so their faces were staring at each other at an extremely close distance. The two of them froze, just like that. I was worried you'd be cold, so I got a blanket," Miharu said in a high-pitched voice with a blush to her cheeks. "Oh, I see. Thank you very much." Ryo nodded reflexively, pulling the blanket closer to him. However, there was a strange warmth to the blanket that was just placed on him, almost as though it was used moments before it had been given to him. When Ryo realized that fact, he glanced down at the blanket. Sure enough, it wasn't the one he usually used. Could this possibly be Miharu's? It had the same pattern as the blanket he had given to Miharu to use. Dumbfounded, Ryo froze again. I'm going to make breakfast right now, so feel free to rest a little longer." "Ah, or would you rather go back to your room to sleep?" Miharu asked. She didn't seem particularly bothered, asking questions that showed more concern for Ryo. "No. I'm fine here," Ryo replied, promptly shaking his head. The warmth of the blanket was so comfortable, it seeped into his skin like a nostalgic memory, making him reluctant to part with it. "You are wearing them, right?" One night, several days after Miharu and the others started living in the rock house, after taking his bath, Ryo returned to the living room. There, Miharu and Aishia were sitting next to each other on the couch, drinking tea. But when Ryo saw Aishia's appearance, his eyes widened in shock. Aishia, those clothes. It's Haruto's shirt." Indeed, Aishia was wearing Ryo's shirt. I know Ara-chan can make her own clothes, but she's always wearing the same thing. So I told her it might be better if she had pajamas to sleep in, and she came back wearing your clothes," Miharu explained nervously. "Ahaha, I see." Ryo gave a strained smile of understanding, then looked at Aishia. "It's comfortable. Asia raised both her arms and flapped them to show off the shirt. Maybe we should buy some clothes for Asia after all? Even though she said she didn't need any the first time we went shopping. What do you think, Miharu? I was surprised when her clothes suddenly disappeared when we went to take a bath. And what happens when she's asleep or unconscious? Will that be okay? Ah, I see. At Miharu's hesitant words, Ryo smiled guiltily, trying to mask his thoughts. He had recalled the time when Asia had crawled into his bed completely naked. Come to think of it, what would happen if Ara-chan took off her usual clothes? Miharu asked Asia as the thought suddenly crossed her mind. They disappear if they leave my side, Asia replied plainly. I see. Miharu nodded, slightly bewildered. Haruto, can I sleep wearing this today? I don't mind if you wear it, but don't you sleep in your spirit form? If she was in her spirit form, she wouldn't be able to wear any clothes. I'm sleeping with Miharu today. Ah, I see. Then, it should be fine, I think. I guess it's almost like a one-piece dress. Ryo nodded in confusion, looking at Asia's frame. Because she was wearing a men's shirt, the size was completely wrong. It was in danger of falling off at any moment. Not to mention the abnormally large amount of exposed skin on the lower half of her body. It was all such a sight for sore eyes. Ryo averted his gaze awkwardly. Ara-chan, I can lend you my clothes instead? Miharu questioned. She must have had a similar thought to Ryo. Asia shook her head bluntly. I'm fine. Haha, Ryo laughed dryly. Miharu also found herself at a loss for words. I'm starting to get sleepy. With a small yawn, Asia heavily slumped over the sofa. Her appearance was so defenseless that sure enough, her shirt fell loose. Miharu tried to get Asia to sit up in a fluster. Ara-chan, you'll catch a cold if you sleep here. Shall we go to my room? Suddenly, her gaze was drawn to the shirt tail that was only barely covering Asia's exposed rear, and she choked on her words. Miharu? Ryo asked Miharu quizzically. Haruto. Miharu called in a hurry. Why yes? Why you didn't see, right? She asked frantically. Huh? Ah, right. Unsure of what was going on, Ryo cocked his head in confusion. Thank goodness. Miharu sighed in relief, before making Asia sit up in a hurry. Aori-chan, get up. Millimeter. Asia sat up languidly. Miharu took a deep breath. Ari-chan. You are wearing them, right? She asked in a quiet and shy voice. Wearing what? Your underwear. Nope. Asia shook her head calmly. What? That's no good. You're a girl. What if Haruto sees you? Miharu yelled, her face completely pale. I don't mind if it's Haruto, though. Asia looked at Ryo and inclined her head curiously. Miharu was utterly shaken. Why you have to mind? Geez. Haruto, can we take Asia shopping tomorrow? She asked, turning to Ryo. Why yes, let's go. As soon as possible. Ryo nodded with debilitating embarrassment. Welcome home, master. One day, Ryo opened the door to his rock house. Welcome home, master. With Miharu standing there, greeting him with a springy voice and an adorable smile. Miharu. Ryo's eyes widened with dumbfounded surprise. Miharu was wearing what could only be described as a maid outfit. She elegantly pinched the classic long skirt with her fingertips. After Ryo remained frozen, she looked up at his face. Is something the matter, master? Have I made an error somewhere? She asked worriedly. Ryo shook his head, his voice coming out flustered. No, you're not lacking in anything. There's no way you could. Thank goodness, Miharu said with a sigh of relief. But, master, are you feeling well? Your face seems rather red. Please excuse me. She stared at Ryo's face closely, then hesitantly reached a hand out to his cheek. Ryo flinched. Master. I think you may have a fever after all. I'd like to check properly. Will you bend over a little? I'm too short to reach. Miharu stretched upwards as much as she could in front of Ryo, looking apologetic as she spoke. Why yeah, sure. Ryo promptly bent his knees and lowered the position of his face, so that Miharu was able to place her forehead against Ryo's. You really do have a fever, she murmured anxiously. No, this isn't a fever. But I may indeed be feverish right now. Ryo denied it in a haste, then tried to come up with an explanation. Master, you should lie down immediately. I'll do my best to nurse you to full health. Master is always working so hard. Don't you think you deserve to rest for today? Miharu asked enthusiastically, then tightly grabbed Ryo's hand. Ah, yes. Unable to meet Miharu's eyes, Ryo stared down at their clasped hands as he nodded nervously. Ah, I am sorry. I touched Master with too much familiarity. With a red face, Miharu apologetically let go of Ryo's hand, but he reached for her hand back. No, that's not true. Could you take me to my bedroom? He asked. Why yes, of course. Miharu's cheeks flushed even more as she agreed with a bashful smile. She led him to his bedroom, her hand still in his. Miharu made Ryo sit on his bed. Master, I'll wipe your sweat for you, so would you please remove your clothes, she offered. Ryo was taken aback. No, that's asking for too much, he said disapprovingly. No, this is my job. That is, unless you don't want it. Despite Miharu gathering up her courage to protest, the last part of her question was asked with caution. Ryo nodded hesitantly. Only if you don't mind, then. Miharu shook her head. I don't mind at all. I'm happy to do so. Because no, however, she lost her momentum in the middle of her exclamation and ducked her head in embarrassment. Miharu? Ryo said, watching her expression carefully. No. It's nothing. I should get to wiping your sweat already. Miharu smiled shyly, then shook her head to dismiss the topic. Ryo nodded hesitantly once more. All right. Isn't Miharu acting a little weird today? Wait, what's more weird is the situation right now. Why has Miharu become my maid? Snapping back to his senses with a gasp, Ryo writhed his entire body in agony. Suddenly, he could feel his consciousness rapidly coming to her. Ryo sprung up from where he lay in bed. He opened his eyes with a blink and his vision suddenly changed to the familiar sight of his bedroom. For some reason, Aishia was standing right next to him, wearing the same maid outfit that Miharu had been wearing. Good morning, Master, she said, inclining her head. So it was a dream. I must be tired. Ryo's face twitched as he sighed and fell back against his bed. His mind gradually grew hazy once more. Good night, Master. He thought he heard a voice say, your red cheeks are because of the fever, right? On a day roughly 2 weeks after Miharu, Oki, and Masato began living with Ryo, Miharu had exerted herself too much trying to get used to her new life and came down with a fever. Ryo noticed something was wrong with her expression as they were making breakfast, then immediately checked on her condition and sent her to rest in her room. He handed Miharu a mug filled with elven-made medicine. It's probably a cold. If you take this medicine and rest, your fever should go down by nightfall. You should stay in this room and relax. Okay. I'm sorry, Miharu apologized with a reddened face. What are you apologizing for? Ryo asked with a soft smile. For causing you trouble. You're no trouble at all, Miharu. You're working your hardest if anything. You're working too hard. You're even doing over half the housework. That's just my job, she said gloomily. Maybe I've been putting too much of a burden on you. Ryo smiled wryly. Miharu shook her head in a hurry. No, not at all. If anything, we're causing all the burden for you, Haruto. She knew that Ryo had been cutting back on his sleeping hours in order to make more learning material for their language lessons. I don't consider it a burden at all. Actually, I'm having quite a bit of fun. Then, so am I. Ahaha. I'm happy to hear you say that. Well, let's focus on getting you back to full health for now. Please leave the housework to me today. Okay. I appreciate it. Miharu still seemed rather apologetic, as she faltered for a moment before agreeing. Just leave it to me. Ryo nodded kindly, then left the room quickly to allow Miharu to rest quietly. Once the door closed with a click, Miharu was left by herself. She looked around. Miharu was rarely ever in her room other than to sleep, so it was a new feeling that left her somewhat restless. Or, perhaps it was because she couldn't calm down if she wasn't doing housework. And so, she remained in a state of distress for a while, until a knock reverberated on her door. Come in. Aoi-chan. Once Miharu gave permission for entry, the door opened to reveal Aishia carrying a bucket and cloth. Good morning, Miharu. Your fever okay? Yup, I'm fine. Miharu nodded cheerfully. I'll nurse you. Wipe your sweat away. Aishia offered to take care of Miharu. I'm fine, though. You don't need nursing. Aishia peered at Miharu's face as though to confirm if she was really okay. Then, can I ask you to wipe my sweat away? Miharu felt the need to respond to Aishia's sincerity and nodded in a slight fluster. Got it. Then, strip. With a single nod, Aishia walked towards where Miharu was lying in the bed. Oh, okay. Miharu nervously stripped herself of her top. Show me your back. Okay. Miharu followed Aishia's orders and turned her back around shyly. Immediately, a cool hand towel made contact with her back. Eek. Miharu flinched. Is it cold? Aishia took the cloth away from her body, but Miharu shook her head with a strained laugh. It's fine. I was just surprised at how sudden it was. I'm going to continue, then. Please do. Aishia started to wipe Miharu's back once more with the wet cloth, but Miharu let out a ticklish sound. MMH. You okay? Aishia's hand stopped once more. Why yup. But could you wipe a little more slowly? Ahaha. Got it. Obeying Miharu's request, Aishia resumed wiping Miharu's back. NGH. Aishia's hand moved in a rather bold way, reaching straight for all the risky spots directly. Though her wiping speed had slowed, it actually made her feel more flustered, as it had steadily stimulated Miharu's skin. However, Miharu felt guilty for continuing to speak up, so she endured it. Then, another knock of the door echoed through the room, but Miharu was so focused on staying calm that she didn't notice the sound. Aishia, who heard the sound clearly, stood up instead. What's wrong, Ari-chan? The sudden halt of Aishia's hand made Miharu look up in question. A knock. Haruto's here, Aishia informed her shortly, before striding over to the door to open it. Miharu raised her voice in confusion and looked over at the door. There stood a dumbfounded Ryo, frozen with a tray of food he had made for her. Ryo and Miharu both watched each other in a state of shock, their faces gradually reddening. I am sorry, they both apologized together. Miharu covered her body with her blanket in a panic. Ryo also averted his eyes as fast as humanly possible, then retreated to the living room with rapid speed. That night, after Miharu's fever had completely gone down, her cheeks would redden every time she looked at Ryo's face, making Oki and Masato worry about her.